Jasmine Crockett, a fearless congresswoman, confronts Elon Musk after exposing an AI surveillance program tracking innocent citizens across dozens of counties, implemented without public consent or congressional approval. As the shocking truth unravels, Musk's empire begins to crumble. The question everyone is asking, what did Jasmine Crockett say that turned the tables and brought down one of the world's most powerful tech moguls? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. 9 a.m. Room 216 of the Rayburn House office building was packed wall to wall. Reporters, aides, and analysts filled every seat, eyes darting between glowing screens and the chamber doors. The air hummed with camera clicks and whispers. Above the committee desk, the banner read, "Oversight on Government Innovation." But today it felt more like Judgment Day. Jasmine Crockett entered without a word. Navy blazer, low bun, a single black pen clipped to her folder. No smiles, no nods. She moved like someone carrying the full weight of truth and ready to drop it. Her face said it all. This wasn't a hearing, it was an execution. At 9:03, the doors opened again. Elon Musk walked in like he owned the building. Black on black suit, dark sunglasses, slow, deliberate steps. He didn't speak, just smirked, soaking in the flashbulbs. To him, this was theater. To everyone else, it was war. He wasn't meeting a fan base or a panel of investors. He was facing Jasmine Crockett, and she hadn't come to negotiate. She'd come to expose exactly what his billions had bought and what he thought no one would ever question. According to the report from the Office of Federal Auditors, SpaceX and a smaller company it owns, called NeuroCore AI, had received billions in government money to build smart tools for cities. On paper, it sounded harmless. Better trash pickup, faster traffic systems, easier building permits. But buried in the details was something much darker. The technology was secretly being used to watch people. In 38 counties, the system collected facial recognition, recorded conversations, and tracked behavior, all without telling the public or getting approval from Congress. To Jasmine Crockett, this wasn't just about money being misused. It was about power being abused. It was about privacy being erased without consent. The lines between safety and control had been crossed, and crossed quietly. Now the man who launched rockets was being called to answer for launching surveillance into American homes. And Jasmine was ready to ask the one question he couldn't dodge. Who gave you permission to watch us? The tension in the room was palpable, each second stretching out like an eternity. The air felt thick with anticipation, a quiet before the storm. The committee chair, standing at the head of the room, cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice steady and authoritative. He was about to open the hearing on what had already become a defining moment in American politics, the day when Elon Musk would have to answer for the millions, if not billions, of taxpayer dollars funneled into his companies under the guise of innovation. The words on his lips were measured, carefully chosen. We are here today to discuss the use of federal funds and the responsibility of private companies receiving these funds. But before the chair could even finish, the atmosphere was shattered by a voice, smooth, calculated, but unmistakably commanding. It was Musk standing without hesitation, interrupting the flow of the meeting as if it were nothing more than an inconvenience. He was already in motion, rising from his seat with a fluidity that suggested this wasn't his first time taking control of a room. The cameras clicked, flashes erupting around him as he made his way to the front of the room. "Thank you, Mr. Chair," Musk said, his tone cool and casual, as if he were addressing an audience that had already bought into his every word. "But I think we can skip the formalities. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I think it's important to get straight to the point." He didn't wait for approval or acknowledgement. His words, laced with a quiet condescension, were already enough to command the space. The room shifted uncomfortably, the quiet murmurs of reporters and aides quickly fading as they anticipated what would come next. Musk's words were like a prelude to a performance, each sentence loaded with the weight of his belief that he was the only one in the room who understood the future. He took a breath and then delivered it, his signature line, the one that had made headlines before. "The truth is," he continued, his voice oozing self-assurance, "technology moves faster than the law, and frankly, I'm the only one here who truly understands it." He leaned slightly forward, locking eyes with the room as if daring anyone to challenge him. A smug grin spread across his face, as if he had just solved the world's most complex problem. He was untouchable, unassailable, a man who had reshaped entire industries, who had built rockets and electric cars, now speaking as though his vision was beyond reproach. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting to his self-important proclamation. She remained seated, her eyes focused on the screen in front of her, where a simple presentation was about to begin. With a single click, she brought up the first slide. It was stark, black text on a white background. Simple. Director. It read, "Public service automation is not a right to surveillance." The words hung in the air like a challenge, cutting through Musk's polished arrogance with brutal honesty. The room fell into a profound silence. The weight of what had just been said settled in. Jasmine had shifted the tone of the entire hearing in an instant. The cameras paused, their lenses locked on her, as she sat still, unmoving, giving Musk no chance to regain his footing. Musk's smirk faltered, just for a moment, as his gaze flicked to the screen. He quickly masked his surprise, but it was too late. The room had felt it. The shift, the sudden recognition that this wasn't going to be a lecture about innovation, but a trial of accountability. Jasmine had called his bluff. The tension in the room was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Every eye was fixed on the two adversaries in the spotlight. Jasmine Crockett, poised and unwavering, and Elon Musk, who had spent the last few minutes attempting to assert his dominance over the proceedings. Musk's confident smirk remained plastered on his face, but Jasmine knew she had only just begun. She could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her, the truth that had been buried beneath layers of bureaucracy, money, and power. She knew this moment could define everything. This wasn't just a hearing about numbers and contracts. This was a fight for accountability, a fight to hold the man who had built rockets and changed the tech world accountable for what he had done behind the scenes. Jasmine could sense the room growing quieter, the anticipation thickening as she prepared to drop the first bombshell. The silence before her next words felt like the pause before a heart-stopping climax. With a steady hand, she clicked her remote, bringing up a slide. The screen flickered, and a new set of words filled the room. Words that would make even the most seasoned tech mogul uneasy. She spoke clearly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. In January of this year in Midland County, Texas, your AI system was deployed to record conversations at a local community center. Over 1,700 recordings were made without the knowledge or consent of the people involved. Is that true, Mr. Musk? The room went completely still. Musk's eyes narrowed, his confident posture faltering for a fraction of a second. Jasmine watched as the weight of her words sank in, and for the first time, she saw a crack in the facade he had built for so long. His lips tightened, but he didn't immediately respond. It was as if he was processing, calculating his next move. Just long enough for the tension to reach a boiling point. Jasmine didn't break eye contact. She wasn't finished yet. She clicked to the next slide, bringing up the images of the recorded data, lists of timestamps, names, and locations. The very names of the people whose conversations had been hijacked by Musk's AI system filled the screen. These weren't just numbers. These were real people. Families who had trusted the system, trusted their communities. This isn't just about technology, Mr. Musk, Jasmine continued, her voice cold but resolute. This is about trust. These people weren't just recorded, they were violated. And you, sitting here with your multi-billion-dollar empire, think that your innovation is above the law. You think you can play God with people's lives because you can move faster than the system? Well, let me make something clear to you. No one is above the law. She let the words linger in the room like smoke. Sharp, burning, undeniable. The cameras flashed, catching every shift in Musk's demeanor, every flicker of hesitation that now crossed his face. Jasmine could feel the momentum shifting in her favor, but she didn't stop. She wasn't just exposing the tech mogul in front of her. She was exposing an entire system of unchecked power, a system that thought it could rewrite the rules without consequence. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Musk seemed to be taken aback. His usual confidence cracked, and for a split second, He looked like a man who had been caught in the act, but Jasmine knew better than to let him off the hook so easily. This was just the beginning. The room was still vibrating with the weight of Jasmine's accusation. The eyes of the room were locked on Musk, waiting for his reply. And for the first time since the hearing began, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his demeanor. But as he straightened his shoulders, his arrogance returned. He cleared his throat, his voice smooth but defensive, as though he were lecturing a class of eager students. "We help them live smarter," Musk said, leaning forward slightly. "Our AI learns to analyze community needs to serve them better. It's not about surveillance. It's about efficiency. It's about giving people what they need before they even know they need it." His words hung in the air, polished and rehearsed, like the slick sales pitch he had delivered countless times before. The room was silent for a moment. The way he said it, so effortlessly, made it sound like a simple solution, a brilliant innovation. But Jasmine knew better. She could see right through his well-crafted words, and she wasn't going to let him get away with it. She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. The weight of her next words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. "You didn't ask for permission," Jasmine shot back, her voice sharp and unyielding. "You didn't notify anyone, and now you call this help?" Her words sliced through the facade Musk had built, cutting deeper than any technology he could create. She stood her ground, unshaken, while his smirk faltered ever so slightly. Her voice rose in intensity, her anger no longer contained. "You think you can just take people's lives, their privacy, and treat them like data points in an algorithm?" The words rang through the room, loud and unrelenting, echoing off the walls as if to make sure everyone could hear the injustice of it. She was no longer speaking to Musk alone. She was speaking for every person in that room who had ever been overlooked, for every citizen who had trusted their government, only to have their rights trampled by a billionaire who thought he knew better. Musk's lips tightened and his eyes narrowed, but Jasmine didn't give him the chance to regroup. "You don't get to decide who needs help, Musk," she continued, her voice unwavering. "You don't get to make that choice behind closed doors. You don't get to play God, deciding who gets to be watched and who gets to be left alone. And you certainly don't get to call it help when you didn't even bother to ask." The tension in the room was suffocating. The silence that followed her words was thick, as if the entire world had paused for just a moment to process the depth of what she had just said. Musk's bravado had faltered, his carefully constructed image of the visionary genius now exposed for what it was. Jasmine had made it clear. He wasn't just building a better future. He was destroying the very thing that made it worth living in. And she wasn't going to let him forget it. The room grew still, the tension rising to an almost unbearable level. Jasmine Crockett, her eyes never leaving the screen in front of her, clicked the remote once more. The flicker of the projector filled the room, and the video came to life. It was grainy at first, the image shaking slightly as if the camera itself had been unsure of the truth it was about to reveal. But slowly, the image steadied, and the details came into sharp focus. In the video, a woman, elderly, black, and clearly struggling with the effects of age, sat in her modest kitchen in Midland County, Texas. The woman's hands, trembling from arthritis, slowly opened a letter. The words on the letter were formal, almost benign, inviting her to participate in a free in-home health screening. It looked like any other government letter sent to seniors, an offer for better care, a chance for free assistance. The camera zoomed in as the woman hesitated, staring at the letter in confusion. Then the scene shifted as she opened a box that had been sent to her. Inside was a small, innocent-looking device, a microphone, no larger than a typical mobile phone, but unmistakably high-tech. Jasmine's voice filled the room, her tone steady but firm as she spoke, cutting through the calm of the video with brutal clarity. "The woman doesn't know it yet," Jasmine said, her voice sharp. "But this device is not just a simple health tool. This is a neurocore AI microphone, designed to record every conversation within range, track GPS coordinates, and send the data to a central server." Without consent, the camera zoomed in closer on the device, revealing its sleek design. To the untrained eye, it looked like any other gadget you might find in a modern home. But Jasmine's words turned the seemingly innocent object into a weapon, one that violated the most basic trust between a citizen and the system that was supposed to protect them. The woman continued to stare at the device, unaware that every word she spoke, every movement she made, was being tracked and stored by a company that had never asked for her permission and by a government that was supposed to protect her rights. The camera cut to the next scene, and what followed next felt like a punch to the gut. Jasmine's voice grew colder, more resolute. This device wasn't just gathering data for a health screening, she said. It was recording her life, her private conversations, her thoughts, her fears, and sending them somewhere. A new screen appeared, showing timestamps and live data from the device, flashing rapidly. And then Jasmine clicked the remote again, and the next image appeared, highlighting a detail that sent a wave of disbelief through the room. Where was the data going? Jasmine asked, her words now hanging heavy in the air. Not to the woman's healthcare provider, not to her doctor, not even to the government. It was being sent to a server at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. The room was deathly quiet. Even the reporters who had been scribbling notes stopped to absorb the weight of what had just been revealed. One of the Republican congressmen, who had been prepared to dismiss the entire video as a misunderstanding, suddenly went still. His face went pale as he turned to the screen, his hand frozen halfway to his notes. Jasmine's words had exposed more than just an error in oversight. They had uncovered a calculated betrayal of public trust. The data, people's lives, their private moments, had been funneled directly into the hands of a private corporation whose only agenda was profit and control. The atmosphere in the room shifted from disbelief to outrage. No one could deny what had just been laid bare. The elderly woman had been recorded without her knowledge, without her consent. Her privacy had been stripped away in the name of innovation, while the true cost, her basic rights, had been ignored. Musk had promised to build a better future, a smarter world, but the reality was far darker. Jasmine's eyes never wavered as she looked around the room, letting the weight of the evidence sink in. The silence was deafening. She had not only exposed a violation of privacy, but she had also uncovered a much deeper injustice, one that reached beyond technology and innovation. This was about control. This was about manipulating the lives of ordinary people for profit. And the most terrifying part was how easily it had been done, with no one questioning the methods, no one standing up for those who were being exploited. For a brief moment, Musk's composure faltered. His jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He didn't need to. The evidence was undeniable, the truth now visible for everyone to see. The room was no longer watching a corporate mogul. They were watching a man caught in the act, exposed for all his promises of progress and innovation. Jasmine stood tall, unwavering. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to make grand gestures. She had already done what mattered most. She had brought the truth to light. And for once, the man who thought he could control everything had been exposed, not by his technology, but by the very people his technology was meant to manipulate. The room was suffocating with tension. The weight of Jasmine's evidence still lingered in the air. But Elon Musk, ever the showman, was quick to respond. With a barely perceptible smirk, he leaned forward, his fingers tapping lightly on the polished wood of the table. The cameras followed his every movement, their lenses trained on him like predators, hungry for the next chapter of the story that was unfolding before their eyes. "Let me make something clear," Musk said, his voice smooth, calculated. "This isn't about secrecy. It never was." He reached for a leather folder sitting in front of him and slid a sheet of paper across the table. Musk had confidently placed the Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, in front of him, a piece of paper that, in his mind, held the power to erase all doubts. The words on the page were simple: authorized by the Department of Energy to deploy AI solutions for community services. He spoke, his voice calm, unruffled, his hands resting on the document like it was the key to his salvation. "This MOU grants permission to test AI technologies that will improve public services," Musk explained, his tone dripping with self-assurance. "No malintent, no hidden agenda, just solutions to modernize our systems and serve the people." For a moment, the room seemed to breathe in a collective sigh of relief. as if the legal legitimacy of the MOU would validate everything Musk had been doing. The report had implied something far darker, but now Musk seemed to offer an answer, an official, authorized explanation. He had the paperwork. He had the signatures. What could anyone say in response? But Jasmine Crockett, sitting at the far end of the table, didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her folder, her fingers moving with deliberate precision. There was a quiet certainty in her every movement. As she pulled out another document and slid it across the table, the room fell silent. This wasn't just another layer to Musk's defense. It was the truth. Jasmine clicked a button, and the PDF appeared on the large screen behind her. The light from the projector flickered briefly before it illuminated the document for all to see. "This," she said, her voice steady and clear, "is the appendix to the MOU you just presented. At first glance, it might seem legitimate, but there's a small, inconvenient issue." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, and then clicked the remote again. The screen zoomed in on a section of the document, the timestamps. "The dates have been altered, and the signature at the bottom? That's not valid. It's a forged electronic signature. There is no official notary, no verification, just a manipulated file that you presented as legitimate." The room went dead quiet. The buzz that had once filled the air with uncertainty evaporated. Musk's face, which had once exuded confidence, now seemed to betray him. His eyes flickered between the document on the screen and the members of the committee, his posture shifting. For the first time, the carefully constructed layers of his narrative began to crack. He had just been exposed. His attempt to hide behind a forged document had unraveled in front of everyone. Jasmine's gaze never left Musk. "You thought this MOU would shield you," she continued, her voice a calm storm. "You thought that a piece of paper would make you untouchable, that the signatures would give you immunity. But what you've done here isn't about innovation. It's about fraud. This is criminal." The words cut through the room, sharp and precise. There was no mistaking the gravity of what she had just said. This wasn't a simple oversight or misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act of deception. Musk's mouth opened, but nothing came out. For the first time, his carefully crafted persona seemed to falter. The room could feel it. His empire of words of innovation was crumbling, piece by piece. Jasmine had exposed him not just as a businessman pushing boundaries, but as a man who had exploited the system to further his own agenda. This wasn't about helping communities. This was about manipulating them, controlling them, without their knowledge or consent. The room was heavy with the silence that followed. The impact of Jasmine's words lingered in the air, making every breath feel like it was drawn from the same shared tension. The committee members looked at each other, their expressions ranging from disbelief to disgust. Musk had no quick rebuttal, no sales pitch. The MOU he had relied on to justify his actions had been exposed as nothing more than a fraudulent cover-up, a thin veil that no longer held up under scrutiny. Jasmine didn't need to raise her voice any louder. The evidence spoke for itself. She had laid out the truth, and now it was undeniable. Musk had spent so long positioning himself as a genius, a forward-thinking innovator. But in the face of Jasmine's calm, steady resolve, he was nothing more than a man caught in the act. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Jasmine Crockett as she delivered the final blow, her calm and measured voice cutting through the tension that had been building for hours. The weight of her words, the undeniable truth of the evidence she had presented, hung in the air. But Elon Musk was not prepared to let her have the last word. His fingers, which had previously rested calmly on the table, now drummed impatiently. His jaw tightened as his eyes narrowed, watching Jasmine with a cold intensity that suggested he was no longer interested in playing the role of the cool, collected businessman. No, now he was a man backed into a corner, a man who realized that his carefully constructed narrative of innovation and progress was beginning to unravel. Musk's usual charm was slipping away, replaced by a growing frustration that had begun to seep through the cracks. "You're twisting my words," he said sharply, his voice rising in anger. He slammed his hand down on the table with such force that the sound echoed through the room like a shot. I'm not here to monitor people. I'm here to help them. This is about technology improving lives, not spying on anyone. The forcefulness in his voice, the way he leaned forward was almost desperate. He wanted so badly for everyone in the room to see him as a hero, a visionary, and not the villain Jasmine was painting him to be. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She sat there, calm and composed, her gaze unwavering as she looked back at him. She knew this game all too well. The deflection, the emotional outbursts, the attempts to regain control, she had seen it all before. Musk was angry, but he wasn't angry at her. He was angry at the truth she had forced him to face. "You can call it help all you want," she said, her voice cutting through his words like a blade. "But at the end of the day, you're watching them, tracking them without their knowledge, without their consent. And that, Mr. Musk, is not help, it's surveillance." The word landed hard in the room, and the silence that followed was deafening. Surveillance wasn't just a word, it was a reality, and it was happening to people. Ordinary, everyday people, who didn't even know they were being watched. Jasmine's words didn't just accuse Musk of overstepping, they exposed the injustice of what he had done. The people he claimed to help were, in fact, the ones being exploited for data, for power, for control. Musk's eyes flared with anger, his posture stiffened, and for a moment, his carefully constructed persona cracked. "Are you trying to turn the public against me?" he snapped. "Are you trying to make me the enemy of this country, Crockett?" His voice was thick with emotion now, his earlier calm completely gone. There was no longer any attempt to hide his frustration. It spilled out in a raw, almost accusatory manner. He was a man who had spent his career building an empire, only to see it unravel in real time. And it was clear that Jasmine was the one holding the thread. Jasmine didn't flinch. She sat there poised, unwavering. Her gaze never wavered from his, and her words came out with a cool, calculated calmness. "I don't need to make you the enemy, Mr. Musk," she said, her voice as steady as ever. "You've already done that. You're doing it right now, one data point at a time." The words rang out, sharp and deliberate. The room hung on every syllable, the weight of her accusation undeniable. Musk wasn't just an innovator or a genius. He was a man who had betrayed the trust of the people he claimed to serve. His data wasn't helping anyone. It was controlling them, manipulating them, and doing so without their consent. And Jasmine had just made that clear to the entire room. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Even Musk seemed caught off guard, his mouth opening and closing as if he were searching for the right words, but none came. He was no longer the man who could silence everyone with a smirk or a joke. He had been exposed not by some high-tech gadget or brilliant legal argument, but by the simple, undeniable truth. He had overstepped. And then, just as the room seemed to hold its collective breath, the committee chair, finally sensing the escalating tension, spoke up. "Order in the room," he said, his voice more forceful now than before. "We will proceed with respect and decorum." But the damage had already been done. The truth had been laid bare, and Musk's carefully constructed image of the untouchable genius had been shattered. Jasmine had made her point, and she had done so with a calm, unshakable resolve. She had forced the truth into the open, and now the world would see the man who had built his empire not on helping people, but on controlling them. The battle had just begun, and Jasmine knew this was only the first of many blows to come. The room was heavy with the weight of revelation. Every eye was locked on the screen, every breath held as Jasmine Crockett prepared to drop her final bombshell. The data, the contracts, the testimonies, they had all led to this moment. But now Jasmine was about to give the committee something far more personal, far more devastating. She pressed a button on the remote, and the image on the screen flickered before sharpening into focus. The room fell silent, the collective anticipation thick enough to suffocate. The live feed came to life, showing a shadowed figure, a man whose face was obscured by digital distortion. His voice, electronically altered to protect his identity, filtered through the speakers, crackling slightly with urgency. "This man," Jasmine began, her voice steady but laced with resolve, "is a former lead engineer at Neurocore AI. He was directly involved in the design and implementation of the surveillance systems used across the country. He's here today to testify to the reality of what has been happening behind the scenes at Musk companies. The man's voice, though distorted, carried the weight of guilt and remorse. I was part of a system, he said, his words clipped, that didn't just collect data, it scored people. Every citizen who interacted with our AI systems had a compliance score assigned to them. That score determined whether they qualified for benefits, whether they could access essential services, even their eligibility for public housing. The gravity of his words hit the room like a physical blow. The air seemed to freeze. The committee members exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the accusation bearing down on them. This wasn't just an abstract concept anymore. This wasn't a theory. This was real. Real people had been rated, judged, and denied based on an algorithm that treated them as nothing more than numbers, data points in a system designed for efficiency at the cost of humanity. The whistleblower's voice grew more urgent, his frustration bleeding through the distortion. But it didn't stop there. The data wasn't just kept, it was sold. Sold to local governments and municipalities across the country. They used it to determine how to allocate resources, how to decide who received assistance, who was left to struggle. People's entire lives were being determined by a system they had no control over, a system they had no idea was even watching them. Jasmine allowed the words to hang in the air, the truth settling into the room like dust. Her eyes never left Musk. She knew that at this moment, the truth was out. There would be no escaping it. Musk couldn't hide behind contracts or technicalities anymore. The lives of real people had been caught in his web of surveillance, their futures shaped by decisions made without their consent. A murmur of disbelief spread through the room. The faces of the committee members were a mixture of shock, anger, and something worse, betrayal. They had been led to believe in the narrative of progress, the shiny facade of innovation. But now they were confronted with something far darker. The room exploded. A Republican congressman, who had been silent until now, rose from his seat, his voice thick with outrage. "This is criminal," he shouted, his words vibrating through the space. "We need the FBI involved, now." His voice was shaking, but it was clear. He understood the gravity of what had just been exposed. The air was thick with chaos, the committee members exchanging urgent whispers, some looking towards the chairman for guidance. But Jasmine didn't waver. She didn't need to. She had made her point. The system Musk had built, the empire he had crafted with promises of technology and progress, had been shown to be nothing more than a tool for control, for exploitation, and for denying the most basic rights of the people he claimed to serve. Musk, once the calm, calculated figure at the helm of this operation, was now visibly rattled. His eyes flickered between the screen, the committee members, and Jasmine herself. His usual confidence, the very thing that had allowed him to dominate every room he entered, was slipping. He shifted in his seat, his fingers twitching as he searched for a way to regain his control. But Jasmine wasn't done. She had given the room the truth, and now there was no going back. The image of the whistleblower remained on the screen, his distorted face a haunting reminder of the truth Musk had tried to hide. Musk may have built rockets and electric cars, but he had also built a system of surveillance that now stood exposed, and Jasmine was the one who had torn the veil away. The room was silent once more, the weight of what had just been revealed still hanging over them like a thunderstorm, waiting for its final strike. And in that moment, Jasmine knew this was just the beginning. Musk might have thought he could buy his way out, that his empire was untouchable. But Jasmine Crockett had just shown the world otherwise. The room had grown heavy, the silence now suffocating as Jasmine's last statement echoed through the chamber. Musk's arrogance, his carefully crafted defense, was starting to crack. The evidence was undeniable, and now with every word she spoke, Jasmine was driving a deeper wedge between him and the carefully constructed image of the untouchable tech mogul. But Musk wasn't ready to admit defeat. He leaned forward slightly, his expression tight with frustration, and his voice, though still calm, was tinged with a growing sense of agitation. "Let's be clear," he said, his tone authoritative. "We do not collect biometric data. We do not use facial recognition technology in any of our systems." His eyes swept across the room, daring anyone to challenge him. The data we collect is strictly related to public service improvement. There's no privacy violation. Jasmine's eyes locked on his, unfazed. She clicked her remote again, bringing up another slide on the screen. This time, the image was far more telling. It was a technical document, a plan for deployment that had been signed off by several of Musk's senior engineers. The title of the plan was simple enough, Face Map 5-4, but the details it revealed were far from benign. There, in stark contrast to Musk's denial, were the explicit plans for facial recognition technology, specifications, operational dates, and the implementation codes. The crowd stirred slightly as the document flashed across the screen. Jasmine's gaze never wavered from Musk. She was calm, but there was a quiet fire burning behind her eyes. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice even but laced with quiet fury. "Do you know that as of March this year, 423 facial recognition cameras were deployed across 13 neighborhoods from Chicago to New Orleans?" Her words cut through the room like a blade. "And do you know that these cameras are connected to the very system you've been calling innovative?" The words struck hard. Musk's face, which had been confident just moments before, now faltered. His eyes narrowed as the realization of what she was asking sank in. The facade he had built around his tech empire was beginning to collapse in real time. The quiet murmurs in the room grew louder as the weight of Jasmine's question sank in. This wasn't just about innovation. This was about control, and Musk had been at the center of it all. The moment stretched out, taut with tension. Musk remained silent, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't move. His usual sharpness had disappeared, replaced by a growing sense of unease. He had expected to be the one delivering the crushing blows today, not the one on the receiving end. Jasmine let the silence hang for a few more seconds, watching Musk as if waiting for him to break. She could see the discomfort creeping into his posture, the way his fingers fidgeted on the edge of the table. He was losing his grip. The room was turning on him, and for once Musk was just a man in a seat, caught in his own web. But he wasn't ready to go down without a fight. He looked at his legal team, his jaw tightening, before he turned back to the committee, a flicker of anger flashing behind his eyes. "That's," he started, but his words trailed off as his lawyer suddenly stood up. "We request a brief recess," the lawyer interjected quickly, his voice shaking slightly. "For the mental well-being of my client, we ask for a short break. The pressure of this hearing is beginning to affect his ability to continue." The words were a desperate, feeble attempt to regain control of the situation. Jasmine watched the lawyer, her expression unmoving. She wasn't buying it. She could feel the injustice in the air, the way Musk had been allowed to play with people's lives and get away with it for so long. He had just been caught red-handed, and now in the face of the truth, he was trying to escape behind the guise of mental health concerns. Her voice was cool but sharp, cutting through the murmur of the room. "A break?" she repeated, her gaze fixed on the lawyer, then back to Musk. "No, Mr. Musk, we're not taking a break. The people you've been watching and controlling don't get breaks. They don't get to pause when their lives are being used as data points in your algorithm." She leaned forward slightly, her tone intensifying as she spoke directly to Musk. "People have been living under the weight of your decisions, and now that the truth is out, you want to run? You want to take a mental break?" Her words hung in the air, daring him to respond. "We don't get to stop when we're held accountable. Neither do you." There was a palpable shift in the room as Jasmine's words hit their mark. The chair of the committee, finally sensing the escalating tension, called for order. "We will not be having a recess," he said, his voice authoritative. "We will continue with the hearing." Musk didn't protest. His eyes darted to the door for a fleeting moment and then back to the committee. He was trapped. The truth was no longer something he could dodge or delay. Jasmine had expertly trapped him in his own lies, exposing the hidden truth behind the technology he had championed for so long. The room, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, fell back into silence. Jasmine had made her point, and Musk had no choice but to sit in the spotlight, his empire now under siege. As the minutes ticked by, the room waited for him to respond, but everyone knew there was no escape for him anymore. The moment the hearing broke for a brief recess, the world outside the committee room exploded into action. While Musk's legal team scrambled to calm the storm that had begun to take shape in the room, the press had already begun its relentless pursuit of the truth Jasmine had exposed. As cameras panned the interior of the room, the air outside was thick with the anticipation of what was to come. Every major news outlet in the country was live streaming the event, their broadcasts flashing headlines across screens, ticking away with the growing urgency of what Jasmine had just set into motion. Jasmine Crockett exposes surveillance program funded by Elon Musk's company. The headline read across every news platform, echoing the words that had just turned the hearing into a firestorm. The impact was immediate, reverberating across every television set, smartphone, and radio station in the country. Reporters, both inside and outside the chamber, worked tirelessly to piece together the gravity of what had just been revealed. Musk had been caught red-handed. His companies had been using taxpayer money, not to innovate, but to spy on the very citizens they had promised to help. On social media, the story went viral within minutes. The hashtags began to trend as if they had a life of their own, spreading like wildfire across platforms. The face scan gate dominated every conversation thread as people began to unpack the enormity of the surveillance operation. The AI invasion quickly followed suit, with users demanding to know how far Musk's reach really extended into the lives of ordinary Americans. The most explosive of them all, number Crockett versus Musk, took over as the battle between the congresswoman and the billionaire magnate became the focal point of a national debate. It wasn't just a trending hashtag, it was a line drawn in the sand. The debate between technological security and personal freedom was now open. People who had been silent about government surveillance or had blindly trusted the system were now speaking out. On one side, those who championed the efficiency and safety that these technologies promised, blinded by the belief that security could justify any cost. On the other side, those who recoiled at the idea of losing their civil liberties, those who believed privacy was a right that could never be compromised, not even for the sake of progress. The comments flooded in, pouring from every corner of the internet like a tidal wave. "This is the future we've been warned about," one tweet read, racking up thousands of retweets. "Musk is a genius, but he's not our god. Face scan gate." Another comment fired back with an equally fiery response. "Security first. Privacy is overrated when lives are at stake. AI invasion, sure Crockett vs. Musk." The divide was stark. It wasn't just a debate about technology anymore. It was a question about what kind of country America wanted to be. The people who had watched the hearing had been polarized. The future of surveillance was being defined in real time, and as Musk and his empire had been exposed, there was no longer any denying the sheer magnitude of what was at stake. Musk had presented himself as a pioneer of progress, but now the world saw that his progress had a price, one that no one had consented to. The air inside the committee room had grown thicker with each passing second. The echoes of Jasmine's words still hung heavy in the chamber, reverberating in the minds of the committee members who now struggled to process the evidence before them. But outside the chamber, the political world was on fire. Every corner of America, from the halls of Washington to the most remote corners of the country, was engaging in the debate that Jasmine had sparked. The country was finally forced to confront the truth that had been buried in data files and government contracts for too long. Jasmine sat back in her seat, her face unreadable, as she watched the storm unfold outside the room. She had known what would happen once the truth came to light, but she had never imagined that her confrontation with Musk would reach this scale. She had exposed a billion-dollar surveillance program designed to control, to monitor, to invade the privacy of citizens who had no idea they were even being watched. And now it wasn't just a fight in Congress. It was a fight for the soul of the nation itself. Inside the room, Musk was visibly rattled. His usual confidence had shattered. He was no longer the calm, collected innovator who could talk his way out of any situation. For the first time, he looked like a man backed into a corner, and Jasmine knew the truth was about to catch up with him. The room had felt heavy before, but now it was suffocating, thick with the weight of everything that had just been revealed. Musk, the so-called pioneer, had been exposed for what he truly was. Not a visionary, but a tyrant, hiding behind the guise of progress. Outside, the fight had already begun. The world had shifted. What started as a hearing, a mere formality, had turned into the flashpoint for a larger debate that would reverberate for years to come. It was no longer just about technology or surveillance. It was about the right to privacy, the right to be free from control. And for the first time, Jasmine Crockett was not just the woman holding Musk accountable. She had become the face of a movement that was bigger than herself. A movement demanding that people's voices, their freedoms, be heard above the noise of unchecked power. And with each passing minute, the tension only grew. The future of personal privacy, of democracy itself, was at stake. The stakes were now clear. Musk's empire could no longer hide in the shadows, and neither could the truth. The air inside the committee room was suffocating. It wasn't just the weight of the accusations that had been laid out, nor the fact that Musk's defense had crumbled under the pressure of Jasmine's words. No, it was something far more personal. Jasmine could feel it, a shift in the room, a shift in the entire narrative. Every piece of evidence she had carefully laid out had led them to this final moment. And this moment wasn't just about holding Elon Musk accountable. It was about showing the country the dangerous lengths he had gone to in order to keep his empire of control running smoothly. She stood tall, her hand resting calmly on the podium as she clicked to the next slide. The screen flickered to life behind her, displaying a report, one she had meticulously compiled, pulling data from 4 different states. It was a simple slide, but the truth it contained was anything but. On the screen were the names of the 4 states, and the headline in bold, AI surveillance cameras funded through disability aid. Jasmine paused, letting the weight of the revelation settle in. She didn't need to rush. The room was hanging on every word she said. With steady hands, she clicked again, revealing the source of the funds. These 4 states, she began, her voice even but carrying the sting of anger behind every word, have discovered that the funding for the facial recognition cameras we've been discussing didn't come from the funds earmarked for public safety, nor from the technologies meant to improve communities. No, it came from the budget intended for something much more sacred: the disability assistance funds for children with special needs. A murmur rippled through the room as the truth began to sink in. The room, once buzzing with the hum of technology and innovation, now seemed almost suffocatingly silent. The screens behind Jasmine revealed more details: how these funds, initially set aside for adaptive learning devices to help children with disabilities, had been rerouted. The money was not being used to provide the help that it was meant for. Instead, it was siphoned off into a program of surveillance, a program that had systematically used taxpayer dollars to track citizens without their consent. Jasmine didn't rush to speak. Instead, she let the silence settle, making sure everyone in the room had seen the numbers, had seen the devastation of what Musk companies had done. This isn't just about using funds wrongly, she continued, her voice calm, but now tinged with a quiet fury. This is about the dehumanization of the very people who needed help the most. Money meant to support vulnerable children with disabilities was funneled into a system that monitors the citizens it was supposed to protect. She let the gravity of the words settle before locking eyes with Musk. He hadn't moved. His earlier bravado had disappeared, replaced by a cold, stiff expression. But Jasmine could see the cracks. His shoulders were tense. His hands were clasped tightly in front of him. This time, he wasn't the one in control. The truth was, she pressed the issue further. With all the technology at your disposal, with the billions you've amassed, why is it that you still feel the need to watch every single citizen? Why is it that, with all your wealth, power, and influence, you feel the need to track and rate them like cattle? Her words were sharp, each one aimed like a missile designed to pierce through the armor of his arrogance. The room had gone completely silent. There was no more movement, no more whispers or murmurs. All that could be heard was the soft sound of the committee's secretary tapping his pen against his notepad, a dull, rhythmic sound that seemed to punctuate the heavy stillness in the air. Musk's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. He shifted his gaze from Jasmine to the rest of the committee, but it was clear. The once indomitable titan of Silicon Valley was rattled. Jasmine stood her ground, waiting. She didn't need to fill the silence with more words. The questions she had asked, the truths she had revealed, were enough to hang in the air like smoke. For the first time in the entire hearing, Musk didn't have a ready response. There were no carefully rehearsed answers, no diversionary tactics left in his arsenal. Jasmine had forced him into the corner, and the walls were closing in. She stepped forward slightly, not out of intimidation, but out of sheer purpose. This wasn't about showing her strength. It was about showing the world how the system had failed. The funds that could have empowered children with special needs had been stolen and repurposed for a system of control, all in the name of innovation. Musk had the power to change the world, but instead, he had chosen to use that power to monitor and manipulate people, turning their private lives into data points for his empire. "You built your empire on the backs of people who trusted you," she said, her voice still steady, but now carrying the weight of a moral reckoning. "And now, you're sitting here trying to tell us it's all for the good of the people. But the truth is, you were never building a better future for them. You were building a prison, one that only you had the keys to." The room stayed deathly still. Even Musk, the tech mogul who had built his empire by selling the future, was beginning to feel the full weight of the moment. Jasmine Crockett had exposed the truth, and now there was no hiding from it. Jasmine didn't take her eyes off him. "You have the power to change the future, Mr. Musk," she said, her voice unwavering. "But not if you continue down this path. Not if you continue to treat people like data and not human beings." And just like that, Jasmine had shifted the tide. The battle had been won, not by force, but by truth. She had torn down the walls Musk had spent years building, exposing the lies he had fed to the public. The truth was inescapable. The weight of Jasmine's words hung in the air, suffocating the room. Every eye in the chamber was locked on Elon Musk, waiting for a response, but none came. For the first time since he had entered the room, Musk seemed entirely still. His hands, which had once gestured with confident ease, were now clenched tightly around the arms of his chair. His eyes, which had always held an air of superiority, were now cast downward, avoiding the gaze of anyone around him. His face, once adorned with the signature smirk of a man who believed he could conquer anything, was now hard, set in an expression that could only be described as uncertainty, something that, in his world of high-tech triumphs and global dominance, was almost alien. Jasmine didn't break her stare. She watched him closely, her heart pounding in her chest, but she maintained her composure. The room was silent, every person in the room waiting for him to respond, to defend himself, to twist his way out of the trap Jasmine had so carefully laid. But there was nothing. The silence stretched on, thick and oppressive, as Musk's inability to answer became more damning with each passing second. The committee chair, sensing the growing unease, cleared his throat and leaned forward. His voice broke the quiet. "Mr. Musk," he began, his tone firm yet attempting to maintain decorum, "we will need a closing statement from you. Do you have anything further to add before we conclude?" Musk didn't move. He didn't look up. For a long moment, the room held its breath, waiting for the tech mogul, the man who had practically built Silicon Valley with his own two hands, to do what he had always done before, defend his empire, charm the room, and walk away unscathed. But now all that was left was a man sitting at the table, his body language signaling defeat. His empire, built on promises of progress and technological salvation, had been reduced to nothing more than a hollow shell in front of millions of people. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, Musk spoke, his voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the commanding tones that had filled the room before. He didn't pick up the microphone. He didn't need to. His words were low enough to reach only those in the immediate vicinity, but loud enough to cut through the stillness. "We're all afraid of chaos," he muttered, almost to himself. His gaze remained fixed on the table, his voice trembling ever so slightly. "I'm just trying to keep the world from falling apart, to prevent the collapse of everything we built." The words hung in the air like a confession. It wasn't the grand, confident defense everyone had expected. There was no justification, no explanation about the greater good or the need for innovation. Instead, Musk, the man who had reshaped entire industries, reduced himself to a man on the brink, struggling to rationalize his actions under the weight of the truth. Jasmine didn't react immediately. though her chest tightened as the words echoed in her mind. Keep the world from falling apart? It was the kind of justification someone might offer when they knew they had crossed a line, but still couldn't face the consequences. But Jasmine knew better. What Musk was doing wasn't about saving the world. It was about controlling it. And for the first time, he was forced to confront that reality. The room, once filled with the energy of a courtroom drama, now felt colder. The committee members looked between each other, their expressions a mix of disbelief and quiet condemnation. The question that had been hanging in the air for hours finally seemed to have been answered, but not in the way Musk had hoped. This wasn't the answer of a visionary or a man driven by noble intentions. It was the answer of someone who had lost his way, who had been caught in his own web of ambition and deceit. Outside the chamber, the media were already spinning. The cameras had captured every moment, every flicker of hesitation. Jasmine's interrogation had peeled back the layers of Musk's empire, exposing the vulnerability beneath the shiny surface of innovation. The headlines were already being written. The collapse of the tech empire, how Musk's vision became a nightmare. Jasmine sat back in her chair, the weight of the moment settling over her like a cloak. She hadn't just fought against a system, she had fought against an idea, one that many had blindly followed without question. Musk's empire was not just a company, it was an ideology, one that promised a brighter future, a more connected world. But behind the glossy exterior was a dangerous truth: control. And now in front of the entire world, Jasmine had shown that truth. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to throw punches. Musk's own words had done the work for her. The empire he had built was crumbling, and it wasn't because of some external force. It was because of the cracks he had created. Jasmine had exposed him, not through accusations, but through the undeniable evidence of what his empire had become. The room remained silent. The committee, once divided in their opinions, now seemed united in their silence, each one processing the same thing. Elon Musk had just revealed himself, not as a visionary, but as a man who, in his quest for power, had sacrificed the very thing that made his work worth pursuing: trust. No one spoke for several long moments. And then, finally, the committee chair broke the silence with a somber nod. "The hearing is adjourned," he said, his voice a stark contrast to the energy that had filled the room earlier. As the session ended, Jasmine stood, her face a mask of resolve. She hadn't won yet. There was still more to be done. But this victory, this moment, was hers. The truth had been exposed, and Musk's empire, for all its technology and innovation, was no longer invincible. In the end, it wasn't his brilliance that mattered. It was his integrity, and that had been lost long ago. The collapse had already begun. As the hearing came to a close, the tension in the air remained thick, even as the chamber doors swung open. Jasmine Crockett stepped into the hallway, her footsteps steady and purposeful, but the energy surrounding her was electric. The moment the doors closed behind her, the waiting media exploded into action. Hundreds of cameras clicked to life, flashbulbs popping like thunder in the quiet corridor. Reporters surged forward, desperate to catch a glimpse of the woman who had just upended a tech empire. The questions came fast, too fast to keep up with, but one reporter pushed to the front, his microphone held high. His voice was sharp, demanding. "Do you think you've won, Ms. Crockett? Do you think this is the end for Musk?" Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She didn't raise her chin in triumph. She just turned slowly, her eyes locking onto his with the same calm intensity she'd shown throughout the hearing. She had fought for the truth, not for a victory lap. Her voice when it came was quiet but firm, almost an echo of everything she had exposed inside the room. "We don't need geniuses," she said, her words sharp, unyielding. "What we need is the truth." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the press fell silent. The simplicity of the statement, the power of it, was undeniable. Within minutes, her words were splashed across headlines. The New York Times, Time, The Guardian, all leading with the same bold declaration. Truth over genius became a global movement, a call to action for those who had long been silenced by those in power. The truth Jasmine had shown was more powerful than any genius or innovation could ever be, and she had just proven it. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.